Good morning, bonjour, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the press conference of the European Chemicals Agency. In a few minutes, our Executive Director, Geer, Dancet, and our Director of Registration, Christel Musset, will announce the results of the second registration deadline. My name is Mikko Väänänen, and with my fellow press officer, Nedju Jaseno, will facilitate this event here. But in addition, for our online viewers, you can send your questions to the press@echa.europa.eu email address, and we'll answer to your questions as soon as we can. But now, forget.
Thank you. Good morning to all of you. Happy to see you here in Brussels. For us, it's always good to come back here, at least for we who have our home here in Belgium. We enjoy coming to Brussels as well, and seeing family over here while coming to see you. Now, REACH, what's it all about? I mean, most of you, of course, know REACH relatively well. REACH stands for Registration, Evaluation, Authorization of Chemical Substances. So here we will talk about the registration. The registration, if you remember all well, this is the change in the burden of proof. It's no longer the authorities that have to prove that a chemical is very problematic. It's the other way around. It's the companies that need to prove the safe use of their substances. Which means that the authorities then will evaluate the registrations. And that's the E of REACH. And then for the most dangerous substances, or the most hazardous ones, there is the authorization and restriction, which are the ways of controlling the risks at EU level for these chemicals. The purpose of the REACH regulation is to improve human health and environment, to arrive at higher levels of protection, and at the same time to maintain competitiveness and innovation of the European industry. So that is the main elements of the REACH regulation. Now, if we look at the REACH journey, it's like a long road, which started in 1967 with the first Dangerous Substances Directive in the EU, and then there are many more steps up towards the introduction of the REACH regulation in 2006. But the ultimate goal is in 2020, and the commissioners have now, together with the Council of Ministers, agreed on what is the target for 2020. The target to them is that all relevant substances of very high concern are listed or acted upon by 2020. That is the political target for the EU road, which is on the left. But then there is also a world road set at the UN level, which started with the Rio Earth Summit in 1992, and there are many intermediate steps in them, the creation of SciChem and so on. And the ultimate goal is to minimize the adverse effects of dangerous chemicals by 2020. So 2020 is at the moment the target date for having a safer Europe there and a safer world, Europe and world in 2020. Now, would that be easy to get there? If we look back at the creation of REACH in 2006, at the end of 2006, you will all remember that REACH is a very ambitious legislation. There's a lot of demands put on companies and on the authorities in the legislation. And many people had at that point in time still doubt that we would reach these ambitious objectives. And many people would also expect ECHA to perhaps not be able to handle all the registration and all the other obligations that it had. But basically what we have been able to see already in 2010 and back today in 2013 is that this massive effort of thousands of people in the authorities, in the companies, around the world, because basically a lot of people outside Europe have also contributed to registration, have managed their task of achieving the registration deadlines. Now, what are these registration obligations? the registration obligations is all about manufacturers and importers of chemical substances. Now, these are in particular the chemical substances which were already on the market in the 1980s and earlier, and where a lot of information was actually missing. So, so REACH would close the knowledge gaps on all these chemicals on the market. And the first step was for all the companies who wish to register later to pre-register by the 1st of December 2008. And if they pre-register, they were all put under groups of companies per substance, which we would call at that time pre-sieves. They were the beginning of the sieve formation. And then within the sieve, companies had to agree on the sameness of the substance and then start preparing registration. That's what they did for the 2010 deadline, and that's what they did now for the 2013 deadline. And in each of the sieves, Substance Identity Exchange Fora, you had a lead registrant that would, on behalf of the others, coordinate the work and submit also ultimately the joint dossier. That doesn't mean that he or she would register on their own for everybody else. REACH also requires every single legal entity wishing to sell that substance or manufacture it also to prepare its own dossier. And these are what we call the members. And the members also had to prepare their own dossier. Now, and leads and members all had to submit their registration deadlines via REACH IT by the deadlines. So in 2010, on the 1st December 2010, we had the first registration deadline for substances above 1,000 tons and the most hazardous ones, in particular the CMRs, above 1 ton. Then 2013 is the second registration deadline, and that's the one which was there Friday night. And what was that about? It's about the 100 to 1,000 tons. That bracket, everyone falling within that bracket had to register by that deadline if they had not had to register earlier for the most hazardous ones. And then there will be a final deadline for the 1 to 100 tons category. That will be the 31st of May 2018. That is still a long way ahead. Now, what are the highlights of the registration deadline that we just passed? The highlights are that we had 9,084 registrations for the deadline. And this was done by 3,215 registrants, of which almost 35% were SMEs. So what you have, 2/3 large companies, 1/3 claiming to be an SME. How many additional substances have we now registered? 2,923 is the count. So in total that means that we have now 6,600, I'm rounding off, 6,600 chemicals registered since the start of the REACH process. And that really demonstrates that REACH is working, because these substances had to be registered, remember well, by a group of companies every single time. Because then that's the obligation of REACH. It's joint registration that counts, working together. And that working together is basically has worked again for this deadline, and that is what we want to say, is that it was a success in a way that the numbers that we expected to be registered were actually registered, grosso modo. And that is what Christel will now enter into detail in explaining you what our expectations were and what we have received, and giving you some more details of this. So, Christel, I pass you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gert. Good morning, everybody. Good morning also to those who follow us via web stream. So, indeed, what I'm going to present to you, Geer gave you the broad figures on the number of substances registered and the number of dossiers, and I will enter in more detail on these figures. So as you know, the registration deadline was last Friday, midnight Eastern European time, and we let our system reach IT up and running until 2 a.m. in the night to make sure that all companies throughout Europe could register until the very last minute. And it proved very useful because we did receive a lot of dossiers in the last 2 hours, and we did provided a lot of support by phone to a number of registrants. So that was useful to let it open very late. I'm going to put my glasses because I don't even see the screen, so let me see what I'm going to say. So we are not, at that stage, we gave you the figures, but we are not talking about successful registration yet. And the reason is that for registration to be successful, we have first to verify whether the registration is complete, meaning the companies has provided all the information requirements that is requested under the REACH legislation, and the companies has paid the fee also. So at that stage, what we can say is the number of dossiers that we have received, but we cannot consider yet that they are complete and that they are fully registered. And the final figures will be in September. We have until end of August to proceed all this dossier, to process the dossiers, and we will publish the final figures early September on our website. So you got the number ready. The overall number of substances registered is virtually 3,000, 2,923. The ones that are already registered is 2,344. In terms of percentage, I think it's 70 or 80%. You would have to calculate that for me. But it means when we say that they are registered, it means that we have received a dossier which is considered complete for that substance, and we have given a registration number. So the first figure is substances which are truly registered, considered registered. The additional in process, 579, it means that for those we need to process the dossier submitted and verified whether, as I was mentioning, the dossier are complete. We're publishing all the information on our website. There are 2 locations where you can find the information. We have dedicated REACH 2013 pages where we publish all the information which is relevant to this deadline. So you have the address. And we have also another place where we publish all the substances that have been registered since REACH entered into force. And you have the link on the page. So how does it compare with the forecast? In 2011, we had done forecasts. We had done a survey with the pre-registrants that had indicated 2013 at the time of pre-registration. And we had contacted them individually, asking them to confirm whether or not they would register indeed the substance by the deadline. We had also worked very much with the large companies to verify their intention. And altogether, we had information that more than 3,000 substances would be registered by that deadline. And the list is on our website. And what you see on this screen is that we have 2,119 of these substances that have been indeed registered. So basically 70% of the substances that were forecast have been registered by the deadline. But it means also that we have 30% which were forecast and that have not been registered. And I will come back to that in a minute. On the other side, we have additional substances that were not in the forecast and for which we have received registrations. So altogether, it compensates. We were broadly expecting 3,000 substances with the incertitude and the lack of in the precision. And we have received more or less 3,000 substances. Why do we have differences and what does it mean? Well, for the substances that were intended to be registered but have not been registered at the end, there may be different reasons. What we hear from the industry association very often is the companies, when they do the surveys and we ask for information, they are more cautious than reality. So they have a trend to provide more substances than happen at the end. It might well be also that the production volumes are lower and were lower than expected, and potentially the economical situation might explain this point. Something that we are always very concerned and we pay much attention is whether the substances have disappeared from the market. And we have not, we ask very much the industry association, we have regular contact with them. We have not been informed that it would be the case. No signal from the market that substance would disappear. It's very different from the situation in 2010, because before 2010 we had a lot of companies coming to us saying, well, I don't see the substance on your website. Does it mean that it will going to disappear from the market? This time it didn't happen at all, so we didn't get any signal. So that's good news. For the additional substances, there may be different reasons that the company didn't inform us back in 2011 that they would register this substance. It could well be that the production volumes at the end have been higher than expected and that the company has passed the threshold of 100 tons. The other really possible solution is that it's a business strategy, and it could well be that substances are on niche markets, for example, and the companies do not want to inform broadly that they will register the substance, since the information is on our website. So we don't know at this stage. Of course, for the substances that were not registered, we intend to contact the lead registrants that had provided this information and see what the reason. Geert already explained that the companies must work together to prepare their dossier, and they must register jointly, prepare joint submission. And there is the main purpose, of course, is that to avoid unnecessary testing on vertebrate animals, but also to reduce the cost for industry. So we had 82% of the substance have been registered jointly, and that is less than in 2010. In 2010, the number was 94, as far as I remember, and we would have to verify the number maybe. It could be two things. One could be that the more we go towards lower tonnages, the more we go towards specialty chemicals. And it could well be that only one company is manufacturing this chemical, and therefore they would not need to submit jointly, of course. But there may be other reasons. There may be that we have received submission of individual submission in parallel of joint submission, and that's something that we will look at in the future. It's too early to say now. So in terms of registration, so far I've talked about substances registered, and now I would like to present a bit more the numbers for the dossier. And as I was mentioning, we have more dossier than substances. Or maybe I didn't even explain that. We receive more dossier, of course, than substances, because several companies may register the same substance. So for this deadline, as a mean, we have received 3 dossiers on average per substance. In 2010, it was 7 dossiers per substance. So we have received approximately 9,000 registration dossiers, and as you see on the screen, it's in line with the forecast. So it's very good news. In terms of registration type, we have received more than 7,000 dossiers for substance standard registration. What it means is that this dossier covers all types of uses, while we have received virtually 2,000 registrations for dossiers submitted as intermediate. So that is important because the dossier, the intermediate dossier, when a substance is used for as an intermediate only, the registrants benefit from limited data requirements. It doesn't need to submit so much information. And for benefiting from this condition, the substance has to be truly used as an intermediate to produce another substance, or must be used in strictly controlled conditions. These criteria must be met by the registrants, because even if the substance is used as an intermediate, there are still workers may be exposed, and there may be problems for the environment. So it's very important that they are truly intermediates, and we will verify that In 2010, we screened all these dossiers, and maybe you remember that we had done a large-scale communication to ask the companies to verify their dossier and submit updates as soon as possible. So we will proceed in the same way for this dossier in 2013, verify all these intermediate dossiers. SMEs. So Geert already mentioned that we receive registration by 35% of the companies were SMEs. In terms of number of dossiers, 80% were registered by large companies and 20% of the dossiers were submitted by these 35% of SMEs. It's a bit more than in 2010. So we go towards more dossiers submitted by SMEs, but at that tonnage, we are still broadly talking about large companies. At 100 tons, we are still targeting very much large companies, as you see from these figures. We are verifying, something important also to know is in 2010, there were a number of companies that had declared themselves SMEs, and we proceed to verification also because many of those companies were not truly SMEs. And the definition of SMEs is the European definition, which is also available on our website, and we will proceed in the same way on these dossiers and verify whether they are truly submitted by SMEs. The type of companies having registered, we have 40% are European manufacturers. 12% of these companies play a dual role. They are manufacturer and importer. 25% are importers, and 23% are only representatives. And here I would like to explain what is an only representative. For a non-EU company, they may register in two ways. Either they use an importer, and that could be their European subsidiary, for example, or they may decide to appoint an only representative that represents them in Europe. So you see that we have received 23% of registration from the only representative, and it's broadly in line with the numbers of 2010. I think it was 20% in 2010, so in line. The registration by country, as usual, Germany is number one, with 1/3 of the registration. It's a very stable numbers. As far as I can remember, Germany represents 1/3 of the registrations. And even before REACH, under the new chemicals regime, Germany was also representing 1/3 of the chemical business in Europe. So it's very stable. But then it's being followed by the United Kingdom. And then we have in the same, let's say, range, the Netherlands, France, Italy, and Spain, and Belgium. Virtually every single country as European and EEA country has submitted the registration except Malta. So the quality of the dossier, some information on that because it's very, we have reported a lot these last years on quality of data, and it's very high on our agenda in ECHA. So regarding the 2013 dossier, it's much too early to say and to talk about quality. But we expect improvements. There should be improvements for different reasons. The first one is we are still having the same type of companies than in 2010. Already experienced registrants, they've been preparing their 2010 dossier, they were again in 2013, so they should have built sufficient experience to prepare the dossier. We have also communicated a lot about quality in the annual evaluation reports. There is a lot of advice towards companies. And we did a lot of webinars on very specific topics. And in the lead registrant workshop or the stakeholder days, we've provided really personalized advice. So that should have improved the quality. Furthermore, we have provided a new tool, which is called a Dossier Quality Assistant tool, where we have introduced a lot of the inconsistencies that we found in the dossier via our screening exercise. We have introduced them in this Dossier Quality Assistant tool. And the companies can use it prior to submission to try to rectify their dossier through the inconsistencies that have been highlighted via the tool. So the thing that is important to the registrants is the screening that we did, and that can be found in large terms via this tool. We will do it again ourselves toward the end of the year and the beginning of next year. And at the beginning, we will focus the intermediate dossier, but also we will focus the substance identification of all dossiers. That's very important, substance identification, to make sure that we understand which substance has been registered. And it's really the first point towards other activities, evaluation and risk management. So we want to have it right. So that's a tip to all registrants through your articles, that they should use the tool, verify themselves if they have inconsistencies in their dossier, and update their dossier before even they receive a letter from us. And they should do it after September, of course, when we will have finished the processing of all dossiers. So now that the deadline has passed, what are the next steps for industry? An important one is, once they receive their registration number, is to update their safety data sheet. They have to provide the registration number through the safety data sheet to their clients. And for those who had substance for which an exposure scenario need to be prepared, and an exposure scenario explains the operational conditions and under which the substance can be handled safely. So they have to attach this exposure scenario to the safety data sheet and provide them to the clients. That's very important because registration is one side of the story, but providing all the safe information on chemicals to the clients throughout the supply chain is the other main goal of REACH, and it's very important that it works. Of course, the registrants have to keep their dossier updated. The registration is not the end of the story. There is still a lot of happening, and in particular, if they have new knowledge on the substance, or they find that the dossier has been done too quickly and should be updated to make it better, they have to update their dossier. As regards the downstream users, an important thing to do in verifying if the substance has been registered and verify if the use of the substance has been registered. For doing that, they can check on our website, of course, but they can also verify it with their suppliers, and we strongly advise them to do so. If not, they need to act, and there is a lot of information on our website on what needs to be done if the substance has not been registered. For ECHA, the work is not over yet, of course. We need, I mentioned already, we have until end of August to verify the completeness check of all dossiers, verify that the fee has been paid, assign registration number, and send the registration number to the companies. We will, of course, publish the final numbers on our website in September, and as well as the list of substances that are truly registered. We will contact the lead registrants that have not registered, although they had said they would. And last but not least, we will publish the information from the dossier on our website. Our intention is to publish as much as we can before the end of the year 2030. So, in summary, and as a short conclusion from me before passing to Geer again, we have a lot of substance registered now. We have, let's say, to summarize, 6,600 substances registered since REACH entered into operation in 2008. Be aware that on our website you have more substance than 6,600 because we had already registered new chemicals that were notified before REACH are considered registered on the REACH, and you find the information on our website, so which explains a bigger number when you look at our website. There is a vast information published on our website, which makes the agency website most probably the biggest public regulatory database made available online on the properties and effect of chemicals. The good news about that, and it was confirmed by the REACH review done by the Commission, there is much more information circulated in the supply chain. Companies have gathered a lot of information from their clients on the use of the substance, And in the other direction, the downstream users have received from the companies, from their suppliers, much more information to handle this substance safely, and which is one of the aim of REACH. Which prove also that companies now can take informed decision on their portfolio of substances. Do they want to use it, how they want to use it, and do they need to substitute? And that's also a aim of REACH. So, in conclusion, we can say that this is another milestone that we pass in the REACH story to have better information and more safe use information circulated in the supply chain. So thank you very much for your attention, and I pass it to Geer.
I just want you to present a final slide before we start the questions, because basically, as I said, REACH is not just about registration. It is also the evaluation and authorization. So what is the link between registration and the rest, what we do in ECHA? So first of all, ECHA has some duties coming from the analysis of the dossiers in terms of evaluation. There are testing proposals included in the dossiers by the lead registrants. So ECHA will have to examine these testing proposals and conclude on whether or not the test will have to be done by the 1st of June 2016. This is the first deadline. The second element is that ECHA has also a deadline with regard to compliance check. So we have to examine at least 5% of the dossiers for their compliance with the legislation and the quality of information. And there we have taken a commitment to reach the 5% by the end of 2016. Then what is also happening is that the member states take a duty under REACH with regard to evaluation, and that's the substance evaluation. They can now select dossiers of these 3,000, they can select substances from the 3,000 additional substances that have now been registered. They can go to those and add them to the list of substances to be examined for substance evaluation. And there they don't look substance by substance, but they take all registrations per substance. So there's a different angle of looking at the dossier. And then what is also going to happen is that we are working on the roadmap 2020 with regard to the substances to be listed and addressed, the substance of very high concern. Also here we will do the screening for the identification of those substances, but also afterwards to take them through the processes of adequate control, of more strict control that we can take through authorization or to restriction or to harmonized classification and labeling. And finally, we should not forget that there is enforcement. REACH is enforced by national enforcement authorities. And these authorities should examine whether companies on the market that are selling substances above 100 tons are actually having registered their substance in time, and whether they have done this also jointly and so on. So these are all obligations to be verified by the enforcement authorities. And there are national laws to eventually give penalties to companies that have not correctly complied with the obligations. And that's where we can conclude and pass the floor back to Miko, who will lead us in the question and answer session.
So please, if you have any questions, Nettie will bring you the microphone, and if you could kindly introduce yourself and tell which media you represent, please.
Philippa Jones from Chemical Watch. I had quite a few questions. Initially, you said that there were lots of dossiers registered in the last 2 hours and were lots of help. Could you say why? Do you have any reason why these were registered at the last minute, and kind of what companies? Was it more SMEs than the larger companies? And also, what kind of help were the specific issues that kept coming up? Also, you mentioned, for example, checking whether about intermediates and SMEs. Do you have deadlines for when those checks are going to be made? And I also wanted to ask, you said in terms of no data, no market. Have you going to do any specific checks in terms of substances that have been registered as nanomaterials? And do you have any idea already whether there have been more substances registered as nano-sized materials than last time? Thank you.
Christel, I think it's up to you.
Yes. The registration at the last minute or in the last week or the last hours, the way that the joint submission works is, of course, the lead registrant must submit first before the members of the joint submission can submit. And what we have observed is that certain lead registrants arrived in the last week. Of course, we had provided advice a long time ago to say the best planning is for lead registrant to arrive before end of March, to leave plenty of time for the members to submit until the end of May. But of course the situation is different from company to company, and some of them have arrived relatively late. So it means that probably the members had less time to register. Then you already have latecomers. Don't ask me why people are arriving. It's like, I suppose at school when you want to give something and you wait for the last minute, I don't know. But the lead registrant is an explanation, and we have observed that. In terms of companies, I don't have the breakdown. I don't know which one have submitted at the last minute. But again, probably the members of joint submission. The type of support that we have provided, altogether I think we have provided support to 500 companies, and that's quite a number. And no, through the last weeks, no, not at the last minute, of course, but it means that we have called them very often, and the type of things where we are using them is to pass the business rule, and this business rule is make sure that the rich IT system understands the dossier, verified if it's the right type of dossier, if there is consistency between for example, in case of joint submission, are we talking about the same substance identification between the lead and the member? So that's what we call the business rules. And sometimes it is complicated for certain companies, and we are monitoring that through our system. We can see very well in our system whether a company is facing some difficulties for passing the business rule. And this context, the closer the deadline, the quicker we are to call them saying, do you need some help? And we try to give it as much as support as we can. So we will do the screening. I don't want to give a deadline. It's very dangerous to give deadline, because then you have to follow your deadlines and your commitments. But let's say that we say that we would start, of course, until end of September. It doesn't make sense to start any screening since we have not processed all dossiers. But towards the end of the year and beginning of 2014, we intend to definitely screen the intermediates. And for the substance identity, depending on the numbers, we may decide to do a mass screening exercise or go by batches. So it really depends on the number of problems found. But we want to react much quicker than in 2010, definitely, since now we have the tools to react very quickly. So that's our intention. And finally, regarding nanomaterials, you've seen that we have not processed all dossiers and not all substances. So it's a very preliminary number that I'm giving, and we will update later after the final figures. But we have had 4 substances registered as nanomaterials, and the number of dossiers corresponding to these 4 substances is 80. So it's not in bigger number than in 2010, despite a lot of advice to the companies to indicate whether they use nanoform for their substances.
Okay, I think there was another question there.
Martin Todd from Specialty Chemicals magazine. Gert, I wanted to ask you, you talked about REACH as a journey, and one of the main aims of REACH was around innovation and competitiveness. Can you just say a bit more about, as we're at this point, where we see those markers for innovation and competitiveness? Thank you.
Well, with regard to innovation and competitiveness, what is important is that the substances need to be registered to remain on the market. So for us it is thereby very important to verify with the industry that ultimately substances do not unexpectedly disappear without having potential for substitution. So that is one key element in terms of competitiveness. Can the manufacturing industry still get the substances they need to manufacture their products? So that is the one element on the competitiveness side. On the innovation side, it's rather different. It is there where we are basically having to check whether companies are submitting regularly new substances that replace older substances or substances that are have too many negative properties, and thereby we actually, through listing them, give incentives for substitution, and then new substances can appear on the market. We also follow the notifications for P-port exemption, which is the product and process development on chemicals. Also there we are generally rather positive in a way that we see sufficient numbers of these P-port notifications and new substances being registered every single year. So that, I think, is still positive, although the industry says we would wish to have more time available for innovation. We still see a whole series of companies active in the R&D side.
Sarah Lewis, European Environment and Packaging Law. Did you have many problems within the CEIFs? I mean, I should think that the members weren't very happy if it was getting submitted in the last minute. And have you had any requests to allow after the deadline because they simply couldn't do it in time, from members because they couldn't do it in time because the lead registrant registered on the Thursday or something?
We didn't get this type of feedback, having specific companies calling us saying, look, my lead is too late and I will not have time. That we didn't get. What we had is a number of first disputes in the CEIF, data sharing dispute, and some of them arrived very late, last week actually, and 6 of them arrived like that at the last minute, and we have processed them quickly. We have a procedure in place for this kind of, let's say, contingency situations where it's too late to do a real data sharing dispute process, and where we would put companies in contact. In this context, we provide advice for the companies to register quickly and come back to their situation later. So we have a procedure in place for that. What we have been aware also is that some lead registrants at the end not registering, and somebody else in the CEIF having to step in instead of the lead registrant. Again, it's part of what we call the director contact group situation. And I don't know if you followed or remember, but in 2010 we had considered a number of situations where companies would be prevented from registering, although they are totally in good faith, but there are situations, change of legal entity or whatever. So we had prepared situations and scenarios and also contingency procedure to help the companies in this situation. So we had 10 cases like that in the last weeks where we have given advice to companies how to proceed if, for example, the lead registrant that decided not to register and somebody else had to take his role. And it's a very limited number of cases, all things considered. 10 what we call DCG, the Director of Contact Group issues, and 6 data sharing disputes.
Again, how would you describe the relationship with the Trade Industry Association in this whole process? So you still like to do some low-level grumbling around the person hours it takes and the cost. How would you just generally describe this last phase in the relationship with CEFIC?
Well, I believe that we have in building up all our processes and tools, we have intensively worked together with the trade associations, and in particular with CEFIC and Nanomaterials and Konkawi, who have all had lots of members preparing for registration. So generally speaking, the associations are extremely positive about our collaboration of working together to prepare dossiers. And I believe that they are they have well estimated also the effort it takes for their members to prepare these dossiers. So we have been in regular contact with them, and they have provided us even information on the progress of their members submitting. So I believe that there has always been very good collaboration. I don't see any antagonism around the registration effort. Of course, they may disagree if we are taking them to evaluation and say, look, this or that dossier is really insufficient in quality and more work needs to be done for that substance. We may end up in a disagreement, but let's face it, we have taken a lot of decisions also on the evaluation side, and on average we have 2% that goes in appeal. So this is still relatively low. I mean, it shows really that the industry is willing to collaborate and prefers to work with us rather than see conflict.
Thanks. One of the things that industry has been asking for is that when you publish the information on dossiers, that you'll also contact the companies that have had complete dossiers rather than just publishing information or contacting them when there's something wrong with the dossiers. Is that something you're going to do, and will you publish information about which dossiers are complete on the website, exactly what information you're going to publish?
I'm not sure companies are asking to know whether the dossier is complete or is compliant. Yeah. Actually, we don't do that. We don't publish for different reasons. Because first, we don't check all the dossier for evaluation, meaning that it would not be fair in a way to publish that these dossiers are compliant because we verify them, while others may be compliant also, but we have not verified yet. So that doesn't make really sense. The other thing is we may do targeted compliance check, look at one part of the dossier only. It depends at the stage of the process where we are. So our tendency is not to publish whether the dossier is compliant or not. What our intention is rather more and more to provide good examples on what we consider compliant. And we did it for the chemical safety report already. We have published an example of how a good CSR could look like. And I suppose that over time we will provide more and more information on different, for example, what is a good justification for doing a read across or treating substance in a category. So for that you need to have a scientific justification, and we will probably provide more example how a good justification could look like. So that's the trend.
Any more questions? Okay, if there are no more questions, I would like to thank you for your interest and participation. And just to let you know, all this information will be published on ECHA's website in a couple of minutes, so all details will be available there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.